thought I would follow up on a request by a listener about how to resolve conflict with an avoidant partner by also making an episode on how to resolve conflict with an anxious partner. Now, if you want, you can go back and listen to the other episode about how to resolve conflict with an avoidant partner. I believe that's episode number 62. Or even better, if you want, what I suggest is you and your partner sit down and listen to both these episodes together. Chances are one of you leans more towards the anxious style and one of you leans more towards the avoidant style. So I believe both partners can really benefit a lot from both these episodes, especially in being able to listen to the other person's style and how to help them resolve conflict and what they're going through at various times. So let's dig in. We're going to talk about how to resolve conflict with an anxious partner. Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship. I'm Tom Philp, your host. And as a therapist, I've spent over 10,000 hours helping couples work through their trauma so they can repair ruptures, heal their wounds, and communicate from a place of wholeness and connection. Let's get started. Okay, as I mentioned, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to piggyback off of another episode, but we're going to do the mirror image of it. So in episode 62, I talked about how do we resolve conflict with an avoidant partner. That was coming from what I assumed was somebody with a more anxious style of attachment. So today we're going to flip that script and we're going to talk about how do you resolve conflict with an anxious partner. And my assumption, as I made in the first one, is I'm going to assume that most of the listeners that would be interested in this one is coming from a more avoidant style. And so let's start with a little bit of a review. What is the anxious style about? How is the anxious style created in a sense? And what is the anxious person that leans towards this style of attachment? What are they feeling? What is their mindset that oftentimes plays out in the cycle in a relationship? Well, first of all, the anxious style, it only shows up and is activated when there's a perceived threat to the relationship, real or perceived, I should say. The same thing with the avoidance style. When things are going fine, when things are good in the relationship, as I've mentioned before, these styles don't really come out. They don't really show up. It's when there's stress, it's when there's conflict, it's when there's ruptures, it's when there's a perceived threat or misattunement in the relationship that then one or both partners tend to lean on this coping style. And so that's really important to understand, because if you're looking at your partner going, well, I don't see that they're very avoidant, well, it's probably because things are good right now. And when you're feeling connected and you're in connection and things feel safe and secure, then these styles aren't going to show up. What's important to know is that anxious attachment is usually born from inconsistent parenting styles or parenting partners. When the child is growing up and they can't seem to get consistency in attention, in attunement, in responsiveness and availability from their parents, then what their body learns is either to shut down and turn those needs off or to hyperactivate those needs and push for connection. And so oftentimes, because of the inconsistency in parenting, the anxious styled partner, the only way they know to sort of get what they need is to turn up the heat, turn up the noise, create more attention, if you will, in order to then get that responsiveness they need from the parents or caretakers. The attachment style, the anxious attachment style, it is characterized by high anxiety about your relationship and low avoidance. Now, that was the opposite for the avoidant. The avoidant is low anxiety, high avoidance. Anxious attachment styles, the opposite. High anxiety, feeling very revved up, very anxious inside their body, and low avoidance, meaning that they are not going to easily be able to compartmentalize. They're not going to easily be able to just turn it off and go to sleep. It's going to sort of live inside them, and they're going to run these scenarios around in their brain 1,000 different times because they've got to resolve these issues, in part because they're trying to resolve the anxiety that they are feeling internally. Pursuing their partner means turning up the heat. It means often criticizing, complaining, and blaming. And in doing so, this is their way of protesting their insecurities about the relationship. So when an anxious partner comes to a more avoidant partner, or any partner for that fact, whatever their style is, they oftentimes will point out the problems, point out where the partner's not meeting their needs, and it comes across in a critical, blaming way. It can come across as a very sort of assertive or aggressive way as well. But what's difficult to recognize is the fear that is behind there and the insecurity that lies beneath the criticism and the blame. And then finally, about 20% of the general population falls into the anxious style of attachment. Now, I want to break these down because back in the episode, and I forgot the number of the episode, but you can scroll down and look, I talk about anxious style of attachment, and then I also have an episode on the avoidant style of attachment as well. And I broke them into categories. So I just want to do a review on these particular categories as well, so we can wrap our arms around what the anxious person is like, what they're going through, because what they appear on the outside does not often reflect what's really going on with them on the inside. So in terms of their perception of closeness and intimacy, the insecure or anxious style of attachment is very much worried about rejection and abandonment. And when they're triggered, it hyperactivates their attachment needs. Where oftentimes the avoidant style, it doesn't trigger their attachment needs because they've learned to turn those off. So the anxious partner seeks closeness, they seek intimacy, and their whole style of trying to get that in a relationship is to sort of turn up the heat, is to move aggressively towards their partner to resolve that anxiety, that fear, and that insecurity they're feeling. They tend to dominate the conversations. A lot of times the anxious partner is very feelings-based, so they oftentimes can be very good communicators. One of the things I hear from avoidant partners is, well, he is much better about communicating than I am. Or, she uses so many more words and she's so much better about her feelings and how to communicate that than I am. Yes, of course, that makes sense because nobody was there for you to be able to have that reflected. And so you never got the practice you needed in order to be better about communicating your feelings. That makes perfect sense. But the anxious partner oftentimes will be very loquacious. They will be able to communicate their feelings very well. Again, their style of resolving conflict tends to push for a reaction. If they push hard enough and they make their avoidant partner angry, that's not necessarily what they want, but at least that's engagement. At least that's getting the engagement that they really desire. So even though they're not necessarily, that's not optimal for them, that's not what they're going for, at least now they've got emotional engagement. And that for an anxious partner is better than silence. It's better than withdrawal. It's better than their partner shutting down. Oftentimes their internal model of themselves and others, they can ruminate on past hurts and disappointments. And oftentimes they want to feel so close and so connected, they oftentimes can want to merge with their partner and become one. That's how they're dealing with those feelings inside of them. And finally, their ability to reflect on themselves can often be limited. The anxious partner tends to reflect way more on what their partner's thinking and feeling or not thinking and feeling, or what their partner's motivation is, rather than reflecting on their own feelings. So they tend to externalize a lot of their reflection onto other people. Why aren't they giving me what I need? Why are they shutting down? Why are they refusing this? Why can't they just love me? So on and so forth. And as opposed to, how do I present myself? How do I come across? How do I deal with this anxiety? What am I really feeling? So on and so forth, in order to reflect inward. So they tend to reflect a lot of their negative self-images. I'm too much. I'm unlovable, which fuels that anxiety even more and pushes them more towards that aggressive style of trying to get what they need from their partner. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a review of what the anxious style of attachment is like. Now, the question becomes, how do we learn to resolve conflict if we're in a relationship with an anxious partner? Well, what I would say is, as I said at the beginning, I'm going to assume that you might be more avoidant style. If you're more anxious style, then you're probably not really having difficulty resolving conflict, in that you all might be a high conflict couple. Because if your style is anxious and your partner's style is anxious, then that can crash, that can create some big fireworks sometimes, and then you all calm down and life's okay for a while until you smash into each other again with some kind of rupture. It creates big fireworks, a lot of emotion, and that might play out in sort of a high conflict style of couples that we often see as therapists. And then things calm down and you repeat that cycle over and over. But where I see couples more often get caught is when you have an anxious partner and an avoidant partner. So the first thing I would say, if you are in a relationship with a more anxious style partner, is show up, show up, show up. Because what really drives them crazy, what really fuels their biggest fear, is that they are alone in this relationship to make it work. They are alone to try to discuss things. They are too much and have too much emotion for their partner. And so every time they try to show up and be themselves and talk about issues and talk about their feelings, their partner sends them signals by shutting down and moving away that their feelings aren't good enough, that their feelings aren't worth listening to and paying attention. And so they feel oftentimes very alone in the relationship because they feel like if it's going to work, it's all up to them. So if you're more avoidant style, you've got to show up, and show up. Just like I said on the last podcast, I think number 62, where I talked about how do you resolve conflict with an avoidant partner? Safety, safety, safety. Because the avoidant partner is going to be quickly overwhelmed by the anxiety you're bringing to the relationship or to that issue. And his natural tendency, his body's telling him to keep himself safe or her safe, that she needs to shut down and pull away. And so it's just the opposite. When you've got an anxious partner, you've got to be able to show up and stay engaged the very best that you can, so your partner doesn't feel like you are running or shutting down or emotionally shutting off. So that is probably one of the biggest things I would say. The second thing I would say, and this is for the anxious partner, one of the things that they have to do to help themselves is they have to learn how to self-soothe. Part of the reason couples get caught in the cycle in the first place is because the anxious partner struggles with self-soothing and relies almost exclusively on others soothing. They want to be soothed by their partner. They want their partner to be emotionally engaged and available at all times to them because that makes them feel less anxious. And so they rely on other soothing, and they need to incorporate more self-soothing. So they need to incorporate more internalized self-talk that it's going to be okay. My partner cares about me, and they're going to want to hear what I have to say. My partner wants to be available to me if I don't overwhelm them. I can show up and I can be myself, but I can just turn down the volume just slightly so that I can be heard and be understood enough to get my needs met from my partner. These are the kinds of things that through self-work, the anxious partner needs to be able to incorporate into their sense of self. So that, I would say, is for what the anxious partner needs to do. Switching back to the avoidant partner. If you're listening to this and your style is more avoidant, what do you need to do? Well, I said you need to show up, show up, show up. Here's something else you need to do. You need to provide lots of empathy, lots of understanding your partner's perspective, and lots of being able to validate that. That is so crucial to your partner, because part of what's happening is they don't feel heard, they don't feel understood, and I see this sort of pattern that couples get caught into where the anxious person's style is to sort of criticize and blame, and the avoidant person falls into defending themselves, explaining, justifying, and it makes the anxious partner feel even less understood and less heard. So part of the real challenge for the avoidant partner is to learn how to empathize and learn how to validate. Now, I've said this before, and I'll say it again because I think it's so crucial. Empathy is just being able to understand your partner's perspective. That's it. It's being able to step into their shoes, see things through their eyes, understand their experience internally, while also maintaining your own empathy for yourself, maintaining your own perspective, your own understanding as well. It doesn't mean you shut yours off. It doesn't mean theirs is right and yours is wrong. It just means you can take on your partner's perspective as well. Validation is communicating to your partner that you understand their perspective. And so from a resolution standpoint with an anxious partner, they need lots of empathy. They need lots of validation. And then thirdly, they need lots of reassurance. They need to hear you say, you know what, this is really important to me. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to understand your perspective better. I want to know what that's like for you. That's important to me because I care about you. When they hear those sorts of things, man, their anxiousness on the inside can often just melt away. It can melt away because all of a sudden they feel like you're really attentive and attuned to them, that you want to hear what they have to say and their feelings and to know what they're experiencing. And that sometimes more than anything can calm the blame. It can calm the criticism because they don't feel like they have to work so hard to get their partner to be attentive. So one of the last things I would say is patience. Anxiety can escalate conflicts quickly. So be patient and try to be as non-defensive as possible. I know that's difficult. I know that can be hard when your partner's coming at you, telling you you're doing everything wrong. But if you can see that behind their criticism is fear, they're scared. They're scared that they're going to be abandoned. They're scared that all their old wounds are going to emerge again in this relationship, and they're going to get what they've always gotten, which is to be told they're too much, which is to be left, which is to be abandoned, which is to be rejected, which is to be left alone with all of this anxiety. So it's difficult to see sometimes because when they're coming at you, they're coming with such an aggressive style, but you have to see beyond the outward and look at the inward and understand that back there is a lot of fear. And back there is oftentimes a scared child who didn't get their needs met consistently. Okay, so that's a little bit about how to resolve conflict with an anxious partner. I want to add just a few footnotes here to the more avoidant style partner. If you tend to lean more towards the avoidant style, a couple of things. The more you can communicate what's happening inside you, the more it feels like you're staying engaged and showing up for your partner, even if you're beginning to shut down. So being able to tell your partner, hang on, can we slow this down? I'm starting to get overwhelmed and I really want to stay engaged in this conversation. Hey, wait a minute, I'm starting to feel myself pull away. Can we slow this down for a minute, or can we take just like one topic at a time so I don't get overwhelmed? I don't want to pull away, and I really want to hear what you have to say. Those types of communications can go a long way with your partner. Even if you are so overwhelmed that you are getting triggered into fight or flight, if you're able to communicate, hey, I need a break right now, I'm completely overwhelmed, and it's hard for me to communicate or even think what I'm feeling inside, can we come back in 30 minutes and talk about this again? Or can we talk about this specifically after we put the kids down tonight and sit down and talk? That's even going to go a long way for your partner. But saying you need a break without specifying any time to come back, that's what they struggle with, because for them, it's once again sweeping things under the carpet. So if you need a break, communicate to your partner what's happening inside of you and the time constraints for when you want to come back and talk with them again. So this is a little bit about some tips and tricks and tools of how do we resolve conflict with a more anxious partner. This, I think, dovetails beautifully with how to resolve conflict with a more avoidant partner, which is episode 62. So as I said on the outset, I really encourage you guys to sit down with your partner and maybe listen to both of these episodes together, because I think there's so much that you can learn from each other. And I want you to remember this, that you guys were attracted to each other. There was something that you brought to the table that your partner had that you didn't have, that felt good to you. For the avoidant partner, it was having somebody who was full of life and full of emotion and felt things deeply, because oftentimes that gets you in touch with your own feelings a little bit more, which you've learned to sort of shut off or dampen down inside yourself. That's part of the attraction. And if you're a more anxious partner, part of the attraction for a more avoidant style is that this person's probably a rock for you. They're steady, they're consistent, they're level-headed. You need that in your life. And that was part of the attraction for the more avoidant style as well. So I don't want you to think about this purely from an incompatibility standpoint. I want you to think about this from a complementary standpoint. This person complements me, and yes, we may get into some cycles that keep us stuck, but there's also a way out of these cycles once we learn how to meet each other's needs, even in conflict, where we can learn to connect and learn to push through our protections and learn to give each other what they need to help calm those fears and help us from feeling overwhelmed. All right, be sure and reach out. Let me know what you want to hear more of. Let me know what you like, what you don't like. I love hearing from you guys. And until next time, we'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.